chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunez. He says the committee has discovered serious violations of the public trust, and the American people have a right to know when officials in crucial institutions are abusing their authority for political purposes. Let's bring in our panel. Jane Harmon is here. She's the director of the Wilson Center, former ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Our CNN national security commentator Mike Rogers is with us. He's a former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Our senior White House correspondent Pamela Brown is with us, and our chief political analyst Gloria Borger. Let's talk a little bit about the future of some of these individuals that the president, for all practical purposes, Gloria, slapped big time by rejecting their personal and public appeals. Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, the #2 at the Department of Justice. He's in charge. He oversees it because the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has recused himself. He's supposedly not involved at all. The president was asked, "You have confidence in Rod Rosenstein?" And he said, "You figure that one out." And he had an angry look on his face as he said that.
That is not a vote of confidence, and our Sunland Sirfati is just reporting now that top Democrats on the Hill are warning the president that if he were to fire Rosenstein or Special Counsel Mueller, that it would spark a constitutional crisis. And so they are, given what the president said today, and given the fact that Rosenstein is, of course, mentioned in this memo as somebody who approved one or more of these FISA applications on behalf of the Department of Justice, it's very easy to see that he's in the line of fire. Andrew McCabe is also mentioned in here, is gone. James Comey, also mentioned in this, is gone. Rod Rosenstein is still there. He pleaded with the president not to release this. He is, of course, the person, if the president wanted to fire Bob Mueller, he would have to go to Rod Rosenstein to do it. And so what the Democrats are saying here in this letter to the president, saying that they are alarmed by reports that you may intend to use this misleading document as a pretext to fire Rosenstein. They are putting him on notice about that they would consider this a constitutional breach.
And if you read through this memo, what I find interesting is that 2 of the people who signed off on these FISA warrants for Carter Page were people that Trump himself put in their positions. Yes. Rod Rosenstein, for example, he put him in the position or appointed him, nominated him for Deputy Attorney General. Dana Buente, he was overseeing the National Security Division. He was brought over from the Eastern District of Virginia office. So these are 2 people that Trump himself put at the Department of Justice. Something else that just sort of stuck out to me was this is all about the FISA warrant for Carter Page. Now, if you recall, up until this point, the Trump administration has distanced themselves from Carter Page, saying he wasn't even really part of the campaign, that he was really a nobody. But now they're using this to say that the FBI was targeting the Trump campaign with this FISA warrant for Carter Page. So it doesn't quite square in that sense. And let's not forget, Carter Page was someone who was under surveillance going all the way back to 2014 for his ties to a Russian mob. He went to Moscow in July of 2016, a few months before this FISA warrant application, and met with Russian government officials. He admitted that and emailed a Trump campaign aide and said he gained insight into other things by meeting with these Russian government officials. And so people I've spoken with in the FBI say that was also part of the calculus. It's not just the dossier, although Andrew McCabe said this in the testimony that this wouldn't have ever happened without the dossier. I would like to see as a reporter what else the FBI supplemented this FISA application with, what other information beyond the dossier to make their case to the judge.
To get the warrants that were renewed several times. So, all right, so Mike Rogers, you've read the 4-page memo released unclassified. Now the president declassified it personally. He says all of this represents a disaster. Clearly, his goal is to show that the entire Russia investigation, in his famous word, is a hoax. He would like to see it simply go away, and presumably he believes that this memo will help in that process.
No, now we're going to have dueling memos, and out of the classified space, that's never a good thing. As someone who did not a FISA application, but a Title III application, which is the criminal version of the same thing, I can tell you that this is not enough to get a warrant from a judge. So this begs the question, which I always question why, and I think this is why the FBI was so strident about there are omissions in here that would lead you to the wrong conclusion. conclusion if you just read this memo. That's what the FBI, in my mind, was talking about. That means there's a lot of other information. The mention of Papadopoulos means there was other information wasn't disclosed in this very brief memo. And these FISA applications are fairly significant. And you have to show that there's some connection to a foreign government. Think of this. The FBI actually went to Carter Page and said, we think you are being recruited by foreign intelligence agents, in this case, Russian foreign intelligence agents. He disregarded, he continued down that path. 3 years later, they get a warrant. All of that information that led them to show up at his door to those 3 years of other activities is probably in this application. We don't get to see any of it. That's why I think it's a disservice to try to come to a conclusion based on this memo.
You've now read, Jane Harman is with us, you've read the memorandum. What's your reaction?
Well, let me say that Mike and I overlapped for 2 years on the House Intelligence Committee. I was already ranking member when he joined. He became chairman. During my time, 8 years on the committee, serving under 2 or 3 chairmen, we had our differences, but the committee functioned. The committee is now broken, possibly irreparably, and it's tragic because, to remind, the committee was formed in the late 70s. I know this because I served in the Carter White House when the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was passed. It was stood up as part of that to make sure we had oversight over abuses of our intelligence community by presidents, in this case, President Nixon. And by the way, I was a young lawyer on the Senate Judiciary Committee during the Saturday Night Massacre. So I've lived this history. And what's tragic here is that the committee is broken. This is a political document. I don't know what the Democratic version will say, but Mike is right to call for a full classified investigation by the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, and all the relevant people should come up there, and all of the backup material should be reviewed. And my guess is it will show a very careful FISA application process.
That may be possible in the Senate Intelligence Committee, where there's still bipartisan cooperation, but that has completely gone away in the House. There's a war going on between the Democrats and the Republicans. They don't talk to each other. They don't want to talk to each other. They're continuing to fight. So to call for them to investigate what is going on right now simply seems, you know...
It breaks my heart, but the chairman could be removed. That's been a request. He recused himself, and Mike Conaway, who is number 2 on the committee, seems to me to be a reasonable guy. I mean, bring back this Mike. But at any rate...
Without running for office, I might be fine.
Yeah, but you have to have leadership. And Mike Rogers, let me let you weigh in on this. You have to have the Speaker of the House, who's the leader of the Republican majority in the House of Representatives. You have to get him involved. He said earlier today he'd like to see both of these memorandums, the Democratic memorandum, the Republican memorandum, released at the same time. They ignored that. They rejected that. They went ahead and simply released the Republican majority report.
And in fairness, what they probably should have done is held this until the Democrat memo went through the process, because that memo came within a day of them voting on this and the long process. So in fairness in that argument, they could have held this until the other memo went through the process, now that it's even been approved. But they really probably couldn't have voted on it that day because none of it had been vetted. They hadn't gone through the same process.
This looks to me like it's a memo that was written with a conclusion first, and then the facts to kind of cherry pick to back it up. And it portrays an FBI very much in the way the president has called the FBI corrupt. But it portrays an FBI, if you were just to read this, that was nefarious in a way, hiding, knowing they had a biased source in Steele, and who produced biased information in the dossier, which they hid, you know, which was hidden from the FISA judge. And they were knowingly trafficking in bad information to come up with surveillance that would lead them to a false conclusion. And we don't have the information that they received, as we've been talking about, around this table. We don't know the list of particulars that was given to the FISA court. It said, this is what we learned, this is what we learned, this is what we learned. So what we have, you know, what we have here is a portrait that is troubling. And again, Evan Perez said this earlier, and I think he's right. And again, mistakes may have been made. And we We should know that.
I agree with that. I'm not saying that that didn't happen.
Exactly.
The claim could be true, but the process to prove the claim is terrible.
Right, it's like a legal brief.
I mean, it certainly raises very serious questions about the FBI and this FISA application. Why wasn't it included in there that this was a political document? How much does Christopher Steele really know that this was paid for by DNC and Hillary Clinton's lawyer? Glenn Simpson, who's had a fusion, testified that he wasn't told that he was only told that it was someone political or Democratic. But it certainly raises a lot of questions. But honestly, if you're trying to make the case that the FBI is biased, I think they're actually doing a disservice, because I am more skeptical about this, not seeing all the information.
And
so
you know what?
I'm sitting here thinking,
what's fascinating is that even the members of the House Intelligence Committee, and Mike Rogers, I want you to weigh on this, except for two of them, they didn't even have a chance to review all the raw intelligence. Trey Gowdy, the Republican, did. He's a member of the Intelligence Committee. And Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat, did. But Devin Nunez, he himself did not have access to all the raw intelligence upon which this was supposedly built.
And I think this is a huge mistake. If I were on the committee and not chairman, didn't have the ability to say yes or no immediately, I would object vociferously if I could not read the application of the FISA and then ask questions on there's even information underneath the application of the FISA that the judge could ask for at any time. And so without having that full context picture, I don't know.
What I don't understand, maybe you can explain, maybe Jane, you can explain. They let a few staffers go through all the raw data. They let two members go through it, but no one else. Why?
Well, there's a Gang of Eight process where just the chairman and the ranking member, I was in the Gang of Eight, so was Mike when he became chairman, are allowed to see things that the rest of the committee can't. And I assume that's the process that was followed. But let me just say, not specifically about these 4 pages, we've done careful oversight over the FISA process for years. In fact, until about 1990, I was not in Congress yet, but each FISA application was reviewed, or at least shown to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, because there was a limited number of them. The thing has ballooned. But we amended FISA in 2008 very carefully to set up Section 702 and the telephone metadata program. And there's sophistication in Congress about the fact that it works well. And the FISA court is picked by the Chief Justice and is a people with life tenure who were qualified. So to claim in a 4-page simple memo that there were massive abuses just doesn't pass the
criticism of the FISA courts, Mike Rogers, and you've heard it, is that they almost always authorize whatever the FBI and the Justice Department ask. They rarely reject a request.
So that's really inaccurate. And we went through this process, and we went through the very careful process, by the way, in the committee a few years ago to bring in a FISA judge, not as a witness, not as this was all negotiated to come in and talk through how all of that process worked, because we kept getting these allegations that, as an FBI guy, I can tell you I know weren't true. Because what happens is I write the application and it gets signed off through a whole bunch of people, checkoffs. Agents, agent supervisors, the legal department in the FBI, then DOJ, then it gets to the judge. And the judge sometimes, or the clerk, says, you know what, I know this judge. That isn't going to fly. Why don't you go back and do your homework? And that process goes for a while. But can I tell you one other thing real quickly? I'll tell you who else is going to be honked off at this memo, and that's the FISA court. Because what you're saying is, I signed off a FISA. I mean, they take this as serious as anything because they know it's classified and it's not like any other judicial work that they do. And so they're going to be, I know them, they're going to be really honked off that they're giving the implication that this 3-page memo is why I signed a warrant on targeting an American citizen. Are you kidding me?
There's a lot of information that's
they
missing.
didn't know things.
Right, exactly. Well, and let's not forget that the context of, there's the initial application, which included, as we know, the dossier and other information, and we don't know what that other information is. But again, every 90 days you have to go back to the judge and say, as a result of this surveillance on this particular person, we believe we need to continue it because it's warranted this information to support this person as acting as an agent of a foreign power. That is critical, and that's missing in all of this. What was the information that the surveillance of Carter Page warranted for this to be renewed 3 times?
The key question right now is, what is Christopher Wray going to do? He's been slapped big time by the President of the United States. He's the FBI director. He was approved, about 6 months or so ago. And what is Rod Rosenstein, also named by the President to be the #2, the Deputy Attorney General? Can they stay on the job after being humiliated so publicly by the President of the United States after they expressed what they call their grave, they use the word grave, concerns about releasing this memorandum. Everybody stand by. We just got a statement also from the Democratic leader in the House, the Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, saying this, and I'll read to you her words. Donald Trump has surrendered his constitutional responsibility as commander-in-chief by releasing Nunez's unredacted classified memo. His decision undermines our national security and is a bouquet to his friend Putin. All right, those are strong words. We'll assess that. A lot more coming up. I'll also